Hello friends, and welcome to a very cozy bookish video. I hope that's okay with you, because today I figured we would just sit here and have a wonderful little chat and talk about 10 books that I really enjoyed. 10 books that I've read over the last couple of years that have brought me, as the title has said, brought me out of my comfort zone, but I did truly love. And there are two things I want to explain before we talk about these 10 books. The first one is, I know I'm a cozy channel. I love bringing happiness and coziness and entertainment and good feelings to you. But I do want to express that not all of these books are going to be cozy books. I love a good cozy book, but I also love really stepping out of my comfort zone and reading books that maybe aren't going to be ones that I would normally love, but could possibly love. And as a girl who loves cozy stuff, I also have another side of me that also still likes weird things like B movies and grunge. And like, I just went and saw Nine Inch Nails in Berlin, which was fantastic, but as you probably know, Nine Inch Nails is not necessarily cozy. So I still hope that you stick around and learn about these 10 books, because even if you're a cozy person and love that cozy feeling, it's always great to kind of know some books that you can maybe step out of the comfort zone with and enjoy. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And another thing I wanted to talk about is kind of where my reading adventure, or like my reading my reading era started, and why these 10 books would be necessarily out of my comfort zone. So I have been an on and off reader for many, many years. I started reading back in high school, so I'm 32 now, and back in high school meant, oh man, like 15, 14 years ago. And based on that, if you're also between the ages of 30 and 35, there are probably some books that you might have also picked up, like Twilight or 50 Shades of Grey, Percy Jackson, which I didn't actually read that one, but I know a lot of others did read that in my age range, and many, many other like books that were really popular in that time phase. I was reading those 50 Shades of Grey and Twilight books. I don't necessarily say you should go out and read those books now. I think I liked them when I was that age. I wouldn't necessarily read them now. So that was back in high school. I went off to college and I was reading a lot of classics, but not by choice. I was taking journalism courses and literature courses, so I was reading a lot of classics that I wouldn't necessarily say I loved back then. I considered them very heavy and not very entertaining. Going from Twilight to Dickens, you can see how that must have been a very weird transition. So after college, I didn't really pick up very many books. I went straight to work. I was working 2 jobs, and I was still buying books, but I wasn't necessarily reading them. And it wasn't like buying books, I was buying like 10 a month. It would be like I would buy one every here and there, maybe one every couple months, just because I saw it in Goodwill, or I saw it in the dollar bin, and I thought, oh, hey, this is interesting, maybe I'll get to it. So that was after I finished university, and I was working, and then I met my partner, and we decided that I would be moving to Germany. And I thought, oh, okay, I have a couple books about World War II, historical fiction novels. I'll read those. It'll be good. I was sucked into the historical fiction genre, so I was reading a ton of those right before I moved to Germany, and also when I first moved here. And I found it really fascinating because whenever I would visit Germany, I would learn a lot about World War II. It's very, very important, it being in Germany, and it's really not forced in school, but it's really encouraged in school to learn a lot about World War II, what happened, what were the mistakes, and what was bad. And it's really, really encouraged for the students and the kids to understand that this time of German history is not something to look positively back on. So it's a lot about understanding that this was a really bad time and we needed a change. And I found that really fascinating, especially learning from my partner who is German and understanding from his perspective of how World War II is not something that was just forgotten. it's not, they don't do that. They really push to make sure that the kids understand the importance of the things that happened. So, for example, there's this artist that has, I don't remember the artist's name, I'll put their name up here, but they made these golden bricks and they've placed them in cities and towns that represent the Jewish families that were unfortunately lost or killed during World War II. But it's a piece of art to help you and encourage you to remember back to that time and remember these families. So that's something really painful and hard, but really beautiful as well. And so I was reading a lot about World War II and the historical fiction, and yes, they're historical fiction, so they're not 100% true, but they are based on true stories. And so I was learning a lot about different things, and I read so many of them that I think, a little too deep into the area to the point where I was reading them and I was crying just on the train immediately. And so I was like, okay, I need to take a step away from historical fiction. I still love historical fiction. I still really enjoy reading that genre, but I needed to take a step away. And so I think one of the first books I picked up, so I brought some books from the US to Germany with me, and these were the books that I just bought over the years and never read and kept telling myself I would read. Well, the world shut down and I had time to read. I didn't have a job. And so I started reading one of my first books, which was by Sarah Green. And I really fell in love with Sarah Green's handwriting. I really fell in love with her writing style. So I picked up a couple more books from Sarah Green and decided to continue reading them and read all of her books that were not about horses. So any horse books I did not read, but any of her other books I did. And I was like, okay, well now I need to go out and try to find some new authors. So I joined a book club and I was reading a lot more like mystery and crime novels, and that was good, but I realized like not necessarily my area. And I just kept trying out new books and new books. And in the last couple years, I think I've gotten really good at understanding like which genres I'm going to like and which genres I'm not going to like many of you have. Many of you realize like which books you're going to really enjoy and probably which ones you wouldn't enjoy. But I have 10 books here that I did not think I would enjoy, but I very much did enjoy. And I like these 10 books because these 10 books represent me stepping out of my comfort zone and trying to understand new genres, new writing styles, new authors. And I really love testing out different waters. And so I hope one of these novels is going to help you step out of your comfort zone, or I hope that you've read one of these novels and you can tell me what your thoughts were down below. If it was a book you loved, you didn't love, and what other books you would read or have read that made you step out of your comfort zone. So after that long intro, I'm so sorry, but I wanted to kind of give you a little bit more information before we jumped in. After that long intro, let's go ahead and talk about these 10 novels. They are all different genres, and they're not in any type of order. So I'm just going to start from the top and work my way down. I have my hand right here on the books. That's why I kept padding over here. So I have the books right here, and we're just going to start on the top and work our way down. So the first one is Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. And you're probably thinking, Melissa, what? And yeah. And my partner gave this book to me because it was very short. He didn't give it to me, but he told me I should read it. And I was on my way to a fair for work, and I was going to be gone for a couple days, so I just wanted a short book to take with me. And he said, why don't you read The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway? I had just read The Paris Bookshop, and with Sylvia, the one that's regarding Sylvia Beach. I can't remember the author. I'll put their name here. But I just read that one, and Ernest Hemingway was talked about a lot in that novel. So my partner said, why don't you read a book by Ernest Hemingway? So I picked this up, and I was like, The Old Man and the Sea, that does not sound entertaining at all. That sounds so dry and just kind of, well, so dry. It's about a sea. Okay, sorry. But it was just not something I thought I would enjoy. I wanted to read something by Ernest Hemingway, but this is the only novel we had. And Michelle was like, go ahead and just try this one. So I took it on the train. This was my only book, so this was going to be the book I was going to read, and I really enjoyed it. It's not necessarily a book that I fell in love with when I read, but I think about it quite often. And Ernest Hemingway has a very interesting way and interesting style of writing, especially in this novel. I'm curious as to how his other novels are written, but this one is it's about one topic, the old man and the sea. And it's about his fishing adventure, about wanting to catch this giant fish, and that's all it is. It's not something that is complicated or goes into very many different plot turns and complications. It's just about an old man who he enjoys fishing, and so he goes out and tries to catch this big fish. And he's gone in the sea for many, many, many days. And it's about this, I wouldn't say adventure, but this task and what happens while he puts himself in the situation to complete this task, and what ends up happening afterwards too. And the story feels mundane and just kind of flat, but when you finish the novel, it everything kind of folds together, and it's like this beautiful wrapped story. And I was shocked with, I read it and I was reading it and I was like, man, I don't know if I'm going to like this, and I don't know if I'm going to want to finish this. And when I finished it, I was just really kind of gobsmacked by the story itself and the full story itself. So, editing Melissa here to help out Video Melissa. One of the biggest things about The Old Man and the Sea is, like I kind of put in my text earlier, it's about that white whale. That thing that you have always wanted to do and never did and kept not doing, and then you decide you're going to do it for yourself. It's not about the money. It's not about anything. It's not about the fame. It's about just accomplishing that one thing that you've always wanted to do. And this old man has been fishing his whole life. He's been bringing in an okay amount of fish. He brings in not as many fish as other boats, but he is really an expert about fishing. And one day he makes the decision that this is going to be his task, and this is what the story is about. It's about accomplishing that task that's just always been there and always just played in the back of your brain. It's truly a beautiful story, and even editing Melissa, voiceover Melissa, would highly, highly recommend this book for you. I don't know if The Old Man and the Sea would be a novel for you, but I do recommend picking up Ernest Hemingway. It's fascinating how he writes and how he folds the story together and how he creates, like I said, this beautiful package of this very, very simple topic and very simple story, but it's beautifully written. It's really gorgeous. And I think just testing it out and seeing how it is, and not DNFing it when you're like, oh, it's kind of boring, but really just pushing yourself through it. That's the one thing about The Old Man and the Sea. One, this book has large writing, and it's very short. This novel is 99 pages long. So 99 pages. You can do 99 pages. If I can do it, you can do it. So I think this is a great book to step out of a comfort zone and pick up maybe something that's a little bit more classic, but maybe not so classic like Dickens, but really just a new way of writing. Not even a new way of writing, because this was written back in 1940s, I believe, 1930s? Oh, 1954. I think this is a really good book to just see a different way of writing, especially compared to like some of the novels we're reading nowadays and that are written nowadays. So very beautiful, very wonderful. And Ernest Hemingway is a brilliant writer, and I'm really looking forward to reading some of his other novels. This is now a step in a completely different direction. We have Crypt of the Moon Spider by Nathan Ballingrud. Ballingrud? Grood. I struggle at saying his name every single time. So I actually got this novel in Abominable Book Club box last year, and I read it once I got it, because I was like, hey, it's a short novel. And it's, I think, also like only 130-ish pages, or 111 pages long, and it's also quite big writing. And it's a really quick read. However, if you do not like spiders, do not read this novel. If you are scared of spiders, do not read this novel. If you are okay with spiders or willing to read a spider book, then go for it. But this is so uncomfortable and so weird and creepy, and if you don't like spiders, please skip forward to the next book. I don't want you to listen to this if you don't like spiders, but I'll put the timestamp below. But this is just a very uncomfortable novel, and I think it was really fascinating. And it's a different writing style that I'm also used to, but it's mostly the genre that took me out of my comfort zone. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to put like a comfort zone little tally thingy up here. Like 1 out of 5, 5 being the most out of my comfort zone, 1 being like slightly out of my comfort zone. This was like a 4. I felt quite uncomfortable while also reading it. And I don't necessarily say that this is a book for everybody. I think this was very fascinating, and I really liked Nathan Ballingrund's Ballingrund? I really like Nathan Ballingrund's writing style. I think his writing style was very detailed, but very fantastical, but very descriptive in the sense that you could kind of feel that like twitchy uncomfortableness while reading it. It's really fascinating. But to kind of give you an idea of what the story's about, you follow a young woman who ends up being taken to a moon planet. And on this moon planet, there's a retreat for people to kind of get better. If they have anxiety or depressions or other mental illnesses, you get taken to this moon, and they work on making you better. And you end up finding out that they're using spider silk to kind of help weave things and sew things back together. And it's really uncomfortable. It is so creepy and crawly, but it's so fascinating as well. I am not necessarily a horror genre reader, but this actually got me interested in reading more horror, and I was so fascinated by it that I actually made my partner read it right afterwards. He didn't like it very much. It made him all creepy and uncomfortable. That's why I say it's not for everybody, but it was just so fascinating in the sense of how it was structured and put together. It's a very short novel as well. I don't think it could have been longer. I think it was the perfect length for itself. And if you're wanting to branch into a little bit like more of horror, almost to the gory level, I think this is a good one to maybe pick up. But really, don't force yourself to read books that you know you're not going to like, but do force yourself to pick up novels that you're maybe curious about. I think that's a good way to say that. So this one was very creepy and crawly, literally crawly, and I don't necessarily like spiders, but I don't hate them, and this made me really creeped out, but I still enjoyed it. Maybe really good for the fall season or Halloween season. The next one I'm going to talk about is Clarice Lispector's Agua Viva. If you have never read a book that is like word vomit, or better said, stream of consciousness, then I highly recommend reading this one. You may not get everything after the first read, but there are so many beautiful lines in this. And it's also fascinating to kind of walk through this person's mind and see how you transform, or how she transforms from the first page to the last page. And it's so, again, uncomfortable, but also uncomfortable in a way where you feel connected to the narrator and the writer. And I mean, I've tabbed a couple pages in this book because there were some beautiful, beautiful pieces of writing and lines that just, it makes you think and makes you also feel connected, like I just mentioned. This is one of the lines. Listen only superficially to what I say, and from the lack of meaning, a meaning will be born, as from me a high and light life is inexplicably born. The dense jungle of words thickly envelops what I feel and live, and transforms everything I am into something of mine that remains outside me. Nature is enveloping. It entangles me entirely and is sexually alive, just that, alive. I too am ferociously alive. and I lick my snout like a tiger who has just devoured a deer. I think when you read this novel, you kind of feel detached at times, like where you're not really sure what you're reading. And then you read the paragraphs over and over again because you're trying to understand what Clarence Lispector is getting into and how she is trying to describe these feelings and these thoughts. And it's just quite fascinating. I hated this novel when I was first reading it because I felt confused and I felt like I couldn't understand it and I almost felt dumb. And I hate when I read books that make me feel dumb, but it's okay because those books are not the book. You're not dumb when you read them. You're instead discovering a new way of thinking or writing. And sometimes it takes us time to understand how those are formed or how those thoughts are formed, and then to be able to understand what the writer or author is trying to get across. And sometimes we never get there, and sometimes we have to read it 5 years later. Ocean Vuong, I feel like Ocean Vuong is one of those authors or one of those writers where I read him and then I think to myself, I have no idea what I just read. And that's okay. It's the process of trying to understand the author. And sometimes we never will understand an author. Sometimes their writing style just doesn't click with us. But this one, I was shocked. By the time I was like in the middle of it, I was actually being pulled through the novel. I wanted to understand where the thought process was going and what was being said. I wanted to understand the feelings and the confusion, and I wanted to connect with the character. But as the novel kept going forward, I felt myself being disconnected with the character. And it was really fascinating because you understand her at times and you want to connect with her, but there are times where you don't want to connect with her. And so I really liked this. It made me feel uncomfortable. I was fascinated by the writing style, and I really, really, really enjoyed this. So these, like I had mentioned at the very beginning, some of these are based more on the writing style and what made me uncomfortable. And Ernest Hemingway and Clarence Lispector both have a writing style that I'm not used to, and I liked that. And then Ernest Hemingway and Nathan Ballingrund, I'm going to struggle with that every single time. Ballingrund both had storylines that made me uncomfortable and something that I wouldn't think I would like, but I did. So each of these novels are fascinating because they're bringing in different things that I wouldn't necessarily say I would like firsthand, but I loved at the end. And that's all I'm actually going to say about Agua Viva. I just think you should go pick it up and try it. And think about how the words are tied together and spend time actually thinking about the novel. Don't feel rushed when you're trying to understand it. It took me longer than I thought it was going to. Again, this is another short one. This one's also 88 pages long. So a short one, but one that took me longer because I wanted to try to understand it. So take your time. Don't feel like you need a rush. We never have to rush through our novels. And we're going to kind of switch back to a little bit more horror genre, or fantastical? I don't really know how to explain H.P. Lovecraft. I did not read this whole entire novel. I just read one story from H.P. Lovecraft, and that was The Dream Quest of, what is his name? Kadav? The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. So I just read that story, and that felt like a fever dream. I necessarily didn't like the story. I wouldn't give that story a 5 stars, but I did find it really interesting how that story, or fantasticalism, or that the way H.P. Lovecraft builds his stories has influenced so many other writing styles and other novels. And so I thought that was really fascinating. So I picked this up because I wanted to read another novel, and I realized because I wanted to read The Dream Quest of Valerie something, I forgot, I'll put the book here. Because I wanted to read that one, I realized, I have to read the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath first, so that way I could read that one, so I could understand the story and how it's built together. But there are so many other novels that kind of made me feel the same way when reading this, that I was kind of fascinated by how many people may have been influenced or inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's writing style. And that's what made this so good. And that's what made it so fascinating. And because it made me uncomfortable when trying to read it, because it was written in a way where you have no idea what's happening most of the time, I just knew that big cats kept showing up and saving the day, and I was like, cool. But really, the story is messy and all over the place, and I felt confused most of the time. But the gist of the idea is that there's a man who wants to go meet Kadath, and he has to travel through this like dream landscape to get to Kadath. That's the main point of the story. And we get to learn about his journey, his adventure, the things he meets, the trouble he comes about. It's kind of like a very messy and very disturbing Lord of the Rings, but faster and messier. So if you're, and I'm not comparing Lord of the Rings to this. It's just kind of the adventure style. That's all I was comparing. But it was really fascinating because I think the fact that that made me so uncomfortable, I've been able to read other novels like Underneath This World's a Sea. That reminded me a lot about how H.P. Lovecraft writes. And I'm really fascinated to read some other of his stories. I just haven't had the guts to pick up another story, but maybe you have a recommendation. Maybe you have an idea of another story I could read, and I would read it. But I need your advice because I don't know where to go next. But this is more uncomfortable in the sense that it was a writing style that I found frustrating at times, but I still really enjoyed it. Also, it had giant cats that are in space. How amazing is that? The next one, I don't really know how it fits in, but I mentioned at the very beginning, there's no order to this one. So, Murakami. You've probably heard of Murakami. If you haven't, introducing Murakami. So, Murakami After Dark. I only read this book because I saw a Murakami book in the bookshop. I didn't really know much about him. And I was like, oh, there's a book with a cat on the cover. I'm going to read that because I was reading a lot of Japanese novels that had cats in it. And my partner said, no. He told me I'm not allowed to yet. Not out of like control, I promise. But more because he was like, Murakami is a very interesting author. And it's better to start with a smaller book because if you've looked at Kafka, it's like that thick. And he said it's better to start with a smaller book to see if you like his writing style, and then you can jump into Kafka. And I said, okay, fine, what do you recommend? And he said After Dark. After Dark was a really good one to start with because it's smaller, and you kind of get to understand how Murakami sets up his novels and his writing style as well. And he was 100% right. I was reading this, and again, it felt like a fever dream. I felt confused. I was trying to understand what the point was, and then at the end, I felt like there was no point, but there was also something that was pulling me in, and I was so fascinated, and I didn't understand what I had finished even after finishing the novel. And it honestly, we if you haven't read this one and you want to read Murakami, I recommend it. But the idea of this novel is it takes place from after dark to sunrise. So dusk till dawn. And not the movie. So from dusk till dawn, we follow a character who is just doing stuff throughout the night, and we meet other characters. We kind of jump into a different space, and we're looking at a TV screen. It's very fever dreamish. It's very uncomfortable in the sense that you don't really know what you're reading at times. I'm realizing even just right now, I'm definitely going to have to reread this because there was, I think, so much happening at times that you almost felt like you were missing things. And now when I'm thinking back to the novel, I can see pieces in my head of the story that I built in my head. but I think I'm missing pieces. I think I am. But to be honest, there's a large possibility that I'm not. And it's just those broken pieces. So Murakami's writing, especially in this novel, I haven't read Kafka yet because that is going to be a chore. But this was really interesting, and I really found it fascinating how he builds his story and how it's not really described. You're just kind of thrown into it, and you're expected to understand what's happening. Not expected, I wouldn't say that, but your chore is to put all the pieces together. And I really liked that. I really liked the author trusting me to be able to understand or try to understand what I'm reading. A lot of these books, one of the reasons why they made me uncomfortable is because they were books that I couldn't jump in and understand instantly. I had to think about them and I had to take my time. Again, another short book. This book is also only 201 pages long. So short-ish, not 100 pages, but short-ish. And I still had to take my time reading this. This is not a book I can finish just in a day. It's a book that I actually have to digest and understand and pull myself through and try to get all the pieces and put them together. And then you read it again because you have to try to figure out if you understood it. And so one of the things that make books so uncomfortable for me is when I'm not able to finish it and just be like, okay, I finished the book. But I finish it and I then have to think, did I understand what I just read? Murakami's writing style is also very fascinating. It's very fantastical, like I explained, but it's also woven into this feeling of, is what's happening really happening? So I like this book. I think it's really good. It's a book I have to reread again, and I want to tackle Kafka, but it is going to take me a moment. So if you want to pick up a Murakami novel, I recommend After Dark, but just to get kind of used to his writing style before you jump into one of his bigger books. But I really like this, and I'm now realize I have to reread it again. This next novel I really loved, and I love the fact that my partner and I both read this, and we don't agree with the novel, and we don't agree with what happened. And that's one of the reasons I love this novel so much. And that's Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in a Castle. If you've never read a book with an unreliable narrator, I 1000% recommend this. I loved this book so much. It's ridiculous how much I enjoyed it. We've Always Lived in a Castle follows two sisters who live in a large house, and they live in this house by themselves. And this is kind of like where witches first kind of, not, I wouldn't say that because I don't know for a fact, but it's almost like where you feel like witch hunts started. And that's kind of the exciting part. And these two women are just living in this house. They feel they are distanced and almost shunned from their community. And it is uncomfortable at times because you are not sure what's actually happening because the narrator is saying one thing and then something else is happening. And you're not sure who to trust or what to trust. And it's so well written. It's so beautiful. It's so funky. It's just one of those books where you're just like, what is actually happening? And I sympathized for the characters at the end, and my partner disliked them completely at the end. So I thought that was so interesting, just how polarizing our opinions were after reading this. And I'm not sure why. And I'm so fascinated by that. I'm so intrigued by the fact that Shirley Jackson was able to write a book that created a different feeling for at least two readers. So I'm very curious. If you've read We've Always Lived in a Castle, what was your feeling at the end of it? What were you satisfied? Were you shocked? Were you connecting with the characters? Were you disconnected with the characters? Did you hate the characters? I need to know, because the fact that this book made me uncomfortable because I didn't know if I could trust the narrator. And by the time I finished it, I felt like I could, but I'm never sure if I could. And it made me unsure of my own thoughts. That's why it made me uncomfortable. It was so, so cool though. And you're just trying to piece the whole story together the entire time you're reading it. It's almost like a mystery, but not really. But in the way it's written, you're trying to understand what truly happened in this house. So I love this novel, and I highly recommend it, especially maybe like in the later summer months, or like not necessarily summer, but like when it's starting to get a little chilly. This would be a perfect book to read. And I think I'm going to have to reread it this fall too. So I highly recommend it. I love it. And having an unreliable narrator was so cool. And if you know any other books that are kind of like in that same genre or that same idea, let me know, because I would definitely pick up another book like that. Clearly, because I fell in love with it. I've mentioned this before, and I think if you've been around, you may have heard me mention it a couple times, but poems are not my thing. Not because I don't love them, but because I don't understand them. So if you've recognized a little trend in this video, books that make me uncomfortable are generally books that I'm having a hard time understanding and putting together. But it's good to challenge yourself in those areas. I mean, especially since I've been able to find so many books I've loved based on those challenges. But poems. Poems are another thing. E. Cummings, I love. I love those poems, but I only have a few that I actually understand. Ocean Vuong, Night Sky with Exit Wounds, was one that made me uncomfortable because the poems are so dark and they're almost like wounds. And this is probably the second collection of poems I've read, and I hated them in the sense of how they made me feel and how uncomfortable I felt, because they felt like wounds from Ocean Vuong. And I think he did an amazing job with writing these poems. They're supposed to create feeling, and they're supposed to cause us to feel a certain way. And he did an amazing job. But they're really hard. And some of them are heavier than others. But I felt this entire collection of poems was so hard for me to read at times. And I had to keep putting it down. And that's the great thing about a collection of poems, is you're not expected to read it from back to front to back in one sitting. You're supposed to digest them and get through them. And so I would read one, and then I would digest it, try to understand what it meant. I would also read some stuff about it just to make sure I was understanding it, because I mentioned before, poems are not my thing. I have a hard time understanding them. And so that was my goal, is to kind of get through a book of poems and really understand what I was reading. And some of them were just so raw. So I don't necessarily love this book of poems, but I think Ocean Vuong's way of creating imagery through his words is just really beautiful, and I really love his writing style. So I may not love the book, but I love the writing style, and Ocean Vuong got me to reading more poetry, so I really appreciate that, and I've been able to kind of digest it a little bit more. I've not really been able to understand a lot of it, but I try, and that's the most important part. And that's one of the reasons why I like picking up books that maybe are a little bit more uncomfortable, quotes and not quotes, but a little bit more uncomfortable, because I'm really trying to encourage myself to branch out and understand something new. The next one is kind of interesting because it's not necessarily hard to understand. It's just my first book in this genre, which is kind of weird to say, and I think some of you will be shocked. So as I mentioned, I read a lot of historical fiction, and historical fiction's generally between 300 to 400, 500 pages. I had never read a book that was, I think, over 500 pages until a couple years ago. And I am not a big fantasy reader. I picked up Prairie of the Orange Tree, because it has dragons in it, and I think dragons are freaking awesome. So I picked up Prairie of the Orange Tree, and I was like, okay, this is going to be my fat book. This is going to be my first fat book I read, and I'm going to try to enjoy it. And I loved it. This brought me out of my comfort zone, one, based on the thickness, and based on the genre. I did not think I would like fantasy. I thought fantasy is always like, I don't know. Whenever I think of fantasy, I think romantasy a lot right now, and I'm not a big romance reader, so whenever I think about fantasy, I'm like, I don't want to read about a relationship. This has a romance relationship in it, but it's not the main topic. It's just a little piece, and I like it. I like the fact of how the relationships are built. I love the fact that I have lesbian characters in this novel. I love the fact that the women are the main character. I love the fact that the women have the power. I enjoyed the writing style. I was able to follow it. There's only one perspective that I didn't like, but I really enjoyed this, and I ate it up. I read the whole thing, and I read it pretty quickly. It took me a few weeks, but like, wow. So don't base a book on its thickness. Try picking it up. I know it's intimidating. I bought the prequel to this one because this one's a standalone, but there's a prequel, and I've bought the prequel, but I'm so intimidated by it, but I'm still going to read it. I'm going to do it because I think I'm going to love it. So that's the only reason I put this one in here, because it made me uncomfortable because it's so fat. It's such a fat book, but I loved it. And this one's 800 and some odd pages. 803 pages, I think. No, 804 pages. So I very much enjoyed it, and don't let the thickness of a book scare you away, because you never know what you're going to think of it. I have 2 more books on this list. 7 Moons of Mali Almeida by Shahan Karanatalaka. I'm so sorry. This is beautiful and so heartbreaking. I thought I was going to hate this book. I read the first 100 pages, and I was not into the story really itself, because it's kind of like a murder mystery. But what made me fascinated by it was learning about the culture and learning about this idea of this limbo land, and how we're following Mali Almeida, and he is trying to understand how he died. We learn about Sri Lanka and the city and the culture and the life there. Don't believe everything that happens in here, of course, because it's also a ghost story, kind of. But it was just really interesting kind of learning about Sri Lanka in another way. And it made me uncomfortable because it made me kind of look at the world in a more realistic way of everything's not rainbows and butterflies and sunshine. I mean, we all know that. It's definitely not that way. We may like to watch cozy videos, and we may like to enjoy book content, but we also have to understand that there's other stuff happening around us. We can hide in some of the books we read that are soft and sweet and cozy and wonderful, but understanding that there's other things happening is sometimes hard. And this book made me uncomfortable because I was taking a peek into a world that I don't necessarily want to look at. And I thought it was so well written. And the author, Shahan Karanatalaka, I really enjoyed his story building. I really liked the writing style. I really liked the representation of a gay character, a gay man living in Sri Lanka, where being gay is not something that is well received. And I liked how everything was built together and just how it was created. And I thought it was so well done. And I did not think I was going to like this. I was, like I said, 100 pages into it, and I was like, I don't know if I could continue. I finished it, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so happy I read this. So I like to give a book about 100 pages before I decide if I'm going to continue or not. But if I'm questioning it because I'm not sure if I'm liking it, I'll try to push myself. If I'm not liking it because the writing style is really, really not something I like because it's repetitive or it's not well written or it just feels like it's AI, I'm going to put it down. If the story is about a subject matter that I can't read and I know I can't read, like with death of animals, and it's not like Racing in the Rain, then I know I can't read. But if it's about a topic that is uncomfortable, then I'm going to try to push myself to read it. And this book talked about topics I was uncomfortable with, and that's why I questioned if I was going to like it. But I still read it, and I loved it so much. So try to encourage yourselves to, if it's about a topic that you just generally don't read about often, try to encourage yourself to go forward, because maybe there's something more in that book. If it's just really a dumb book and you really think there is no purpose to me reading this novel, like Cloisters, I'm sorry, but Cloisters was dumb. I disliked that book. I found no purpose of the story. This had a purpose, and that's why I liked it. My last book on this list, my last book of my 10 books is a nonfiction novel, and it's Knife by Salman Rushdie. If you have not read this, I highly recommend it. Holy moly, this is uncomfortable in so many different ways, but also so inspiring. Knife is a memoir, an autobiography of Salman Rushdie, and it is about the time where he was pretty much almost murdered on stage in front of a crowd. He was stabbed multiple times and also in the eye, and this is a story about his journey through the aftermath and how he got to where he is now. And it's so shocking and terrifying that that's what made this book uncomfortable for me, is it's the fact that this is true. And there are terrible people out there in the world, unfortunately. But it made me uncomfortable because of that. It made me empowered because of what happened afterwards. And that's why this book was so unbelievably amazing. And it's made me uncomfortable at times, and it made me worried and scared to be in this world sometimes. But it's also so empowering. And I think this is the perfect book to land on and end with because of how amazingly empowering it is and how much Salman Rushdie went forward. If you're looking for an autobiography, this is definitely one I highly recommend picking up. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about this one because I think you should just go read it. And that's it. Those are my 10 books that made me uncomfortable. And those are different reasons. I mean, we have books that are uncomfortable because I felt like I didn't understand them, but then I had to read them slowly, or I had to take the time to actually work on understanding it. There are books that made me uncomfortable because of the genres, because they're horror, or because the thickness, because they're just fat books. There are books that I just never felt like I wanted to read or should read, or not in the sense of should read, but like there was no purpose behind it. But each of these books brought so much to me because they showed me a new way of writing or a new genre or a new author or a new idea. And that's what the amazing part of picking up new books is because you're actually getting introduced to so many different things and you're opening your mind to so many new things. So I highly recommend picking up new genres and new books and things that you thought you wouldn't like, because all 10 of these books were books that I didn't know if I was going to like, and I ended up loving in the end. So pick up something new. Maybe you want to pick up one of the novels I just talked about. If you do, let me know which one. If you think there are some books that I should read that maybe were different and uncomfortable for you, let me know. I'm always looking for new books to read. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening to me ramble for a little while. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something or got something out of it or felt cozy. Thank you so much for joining me on this rambling video, but I hope you did find some books that you might like and also enjoy in the future. If you have other books that you want to recommend to me that might bring me out of my comfort zone, I would love to read them. Just put them in the comments below because maybe some others would like them as well. And just thank you so much for being here. I love chatting with you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed, like I said, this cozier video because I'm just sitting here rambling. But I really appreciate you guys and wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart. So I will see you guys in a couple weeks with another video. And I hope you have a fantastic day, a lovely weekend, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao!